Imagine the thick smoke slowly clearing over the skies of Tehran. The supreme leader is gone, and the world holds its collective breath, waiting for a declaration of peace. But peace is the ultimate illusion. When you cut the head off a deeply entrenched, complex system, you do not get instant stability. You unleash a terrifying wave of absolute uncertainty. You might think a geopolitical decapitation strike is a swift and glorious victory. I used to believe that exact same dangerous myth. But the truth is far more complex, and it directly threatens everything from your daily commute to your long-term retirement savings. Operation Epic Fury has crossed a fragile line of no return. The sudden death of Ayatollah Khamenei created a massive, suffocating power vacuum. Iran's constitution was never designed to handle this level of violent disruption while under heavy international bombardment. Technically, a temporary leadership council is supposed to step up and take the reins of the nation. However, the harsh reality on the ground is completely different. True power now rests firmly in the hands of whoever holds the heaviest weapons. That absolute power belongs entirely to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, widely known as the IRGC. Do not make the fatal mistake of thinking the IRGC is just a standard military army. They are a colossal financial, political, and industrial empire. They control massive chunks of the national economy. They dominate the critical energy infrastructure. They command the brutal internal security apparatus that watches everyone. They are the ultimate puppet masters operating in the shadows of the regime. Right now, this heavily armed nation is teetering on the edge of three completely different destinies. The first path is an absolute, uncontrolled national collapse. If relentless economic pressure, the loss of top leadership, and continuous airstrikes shatter the regime's core, the entire country could explode. We have seen the deep, simmering frustration of the Iranian people spill into the streets before. Nationwide protests could ignite like wildfire overnight and overwhelm the authorities. If the security forces begin to fracture, especially those crucial mid-level IRGC commanders, the entire systemic structure will crumble to dust. This structural fracture will not be a loud cinematic explosion. It will start quietly, with local commanders simply refusing to answer the phone or follow direct orders. Regional governors will suddenly begin acting independently to protect their own interests. Complete economic paralysis will choke major hubs like Tehran and Isfahan. On paper, this looks like Washington's ultimate dream scenario. It represents complete regime change without putting a single American soldier's boot on the ground. But history teaches us a very brutal lesson about sudden power vacuums. Look at what happened in Libya, when a dictator was abruptly removed without a stable, unified replacement. It birthed a terrifying era of violent warlords and endless suffering. Iran is incredibly large, culturally diverse, and armed with sophisticated weaponry. A sudden collapse could instantly trigger violent regional fragmentation. Kurdish factions in the west and Baluchi groups in the southeast could seize the moment to carve out their own independent territories. Competing military factions would tear the nation apart, fighting for ultimate control over resources. That scenario is not a geopolitical victory for anyone. That is the exact definition of pure, unadulterated chaos spreading across the Middle East. The second path offers a fragile glimmer of hope, often referred to by intelligence analysts as a managed surrender. Instead of a catastrophic national collapse, a pragmatic, moderate figure steps out of the political shadows. This new leader agrees to keep the state institutions intact to prevent a bloody civil war. In exchange for survival, they make the ultimate, unthinkable concession. They agree to completely dismantle the highly controversial nuclear and advanced missile programs under strict international inspection. The reward for this surrender is an immediate end to the bombing campaigns and massive relief from crippling economic sanctions. This model strips away the most terrifying threats while keeping the country from burning to the ground. It provides a graceful, face-saving exit strategy for regional powers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE to de-escalate tensions. This is the cleanest, fastest, and most stable outcome for global energy markets. This peaceful resolution sounds perfect, but it completely relies on the assumption that hardliners will simply give up their weapons without a fight. There is a third path that no one wants to talk about, and it is a scenario that will directly drain your bank account. This third path is the absolute nightmare scenario known as decentralized resistance. Even without a supreme leader issuing orders from the capital, the IRGC is perfectly designed to survive and operate in the dark. They possess a terrifying arsenal of highly mobile missile launchers hidden deep within mountain bunkers. They command vast, sophisticated drone networks that can swarm targets with deadly precision. They rely on deeply entrenched regional proxies and a massive bench of ruthless, battle-hardened commanders. More importantly, this organization has decades of grueling experience surviving under extreme international sanctions and total isolation. That survival instinct matters more than any bomb dropped on their facilities. Instead of completely collapsing under pressure, the regime could simply adapt, shrink its visible footprint, and go completely underground. This strategic retreat instantly transforms a swift decapitation campaign into a prolonged, agonizing attritional war. It becomes a shadowy fight built entirely around cheap suicide drones, relentless missile harassment, and choking pressure on vital global shipping lanes. This is exactly where the conflict stops being a distant news headline and starts becoming incredibly expensive for all of us. Welcome to the terrifying reality of the long war. If this military operation drags out for agonizing months instead of concluding in a few swift weeks, absolutely everything about our modern world changes. Global energy markets are not just reacting, they are panicking. We already witnessed Brent crude prices jumping sharply the moment the first retaliatory strikes hit the ground. Natural gas prices across Europe spiked uncontrollably when vital Qatari facilities were unexpectedly caught in the crossfire. You must understand that the Strait of Hormuz does not even need a formal military blockade to cripple the global economy. The waterway is effectively constrained simply because international insurers and massive shipping conglomerates absolutely refuse to risk their multi-million-dollar vessels against rogue missile attacks. Roughly 1/5 of the entire world's oil supply is forced to squeeze through that incredibly narrow, highly vulnerable geographic choke point. Even a partial disruption in that area sends devastating, immediate shockwaves tearing through global supply chains. If the price of oil brutally surges past $100 per barrel and stubbornly stays there, the political cost inside the United States will explode. Watching gas prices surge to $4 per gallon or significantly higher is not just an annoying economic inconvenience. It is a highly volatile political weapon. Public support for any war effort at home depends almost entirely on whether everyday citizens start feeling the sharp, undeniable pain directly in their own wallets. Then, we must consider the terrifying reality of depleting military munitions. High-intensity, relentless air campaigns burn through millions of dollars of precision weapons at a staggering, unsustainable rate. Tomahawk cruise missiles, advanced interceptors, and complex air defense systems are absolutely not infinite resources. Replenishing these highly technical weapons requires an enormous amount of time, massive industrial manufacturing capacity, and incredibly difficult political budget approvals. If this campaign stretches out indefinitely, the severe strain on international military stockpiles becomes a very real and present danger. This global vulnerability matters deeply because while Washington firmly focuses all its attention and resources on Iran, other major geopolitical players are watching the board very closely. Let us examine the cold, calculating angle of Moscow. Russia's loud public position is exactly what you would expect, offering predictable diplomatic condemnation of the strikes. But beneath the surface, strategically speaking, Moscow quietly rejoices and massively benefits from this Middle Eastern war dragging on for as long as possible. Higher global oil prices directly translate to a massive flood of revenue pouring into Russia's war budget. Furthermore, when Western attention and military resources violently shift toward the Middle East, it guarantees significantly less focus and support for Ukraine. If critical U.S. air defense systems and scarce interceptor missiles are suddenly redirected to the Central Command to protect assets near Iran, Ukraine's defensive posture is immediately and severely weakened. Even the smallest delays in vital weapons deliveries can completely shift the bloody momentum on the European battlefield. There is also a very subtle, highly strategic shift happening behind closed doors. Russia no longer relies heavily on importing Iranian suicide drones the way it desperately did earlier in the Ukrainian conflict. Russian drone production has now been fully localized and heavily fortified within their own borders. Therefore, even if every single Iranian drone manufacturing facility is reduced to ashes, Moscow can easily sustain its own brutal campaign without skipping a beat. In short, Russia does not actually need Iran to win this conflict. Moscow simply needs the United States to stay distracted, bogged down, and financially bleeding in the desert. If epic fury devolves into a prolonged, messy campaign, Moscow quietly gains the ultimate strategic breathing room they have been waiting for. But Vladimir Putin is not the only powerful observer silently taking notes in the shadows. Picture the secure, heavily fortified war rooms in Beijing, bathed in the cold, unblinking glow of satellite feeds. While the rest of the world watches the Middle East burn in horror, China's elite military strategists are observing something else entirely. Publicly, their polished diplomats stand at international podiums and politely demand immediate global de-escalation. But behind those heavily guarded doors, they view this entire bloody conflict as a priceless, live-fire military laboratory. They are meticulously studying exactly how American stealth aircraft perform under the immense stress of a real combat zone. They are calculating the precise operational tempo of the United States' massive, globe-spanning logistical supply chains. They are measuring exactly how many days it takes for advanced American missile inventories to hit critically low, dangerous levels. They are tracking the exact deployment strategies and positioning of every single aircraft carrier sent to the region. Moreover, they are intensely analyzing how the fickle beast of domestic American politics reacts to yet another prolonged, brutally expensive overseas military operation. The absolute most critical data point for Beijing is what happens to the American military shield currently protecting the Indo-Pacific. With significant naval assets suddenly rushed to the Iranian coast, massive deterrence gaps have ripped open across Asia. Consider this chilling geopolitical reality that happened recently. At one critical moment, the only United States carrier normally assigned to patrol the entire Asian theater was stuck in dry dock for routine maintenance. This immense strategic distraction does not necessarily mean the Chinese military will launch a full-scale amphibious invasion of Taiwan tomorrow morning. However, it violently alters the geopolitical calculus for the entire region. As the Iranian quagmire drags on, the terrifying risk of crushing military pressure on Taiwan skyrockets. We are not just talking about a sudden invasion, but a suffocating campaign of highly aggressive airspace incursions. Prepare to see a massive swarm of coordinated drone activity and highly coercive military exercises specifically designed to stress test America's delayed response times. Yet, the ultimate nightmare scenario keeping military planners awake at night is not a slow quagmire or a sudden regime collapse. The true terror lies in the deadly trap of a single, catastrophic miscalculation leading to unimaginable mass casualties. We are currently standing on a razor-thin wire where one wrong move instantly triggers a global catastrophe. The fragile threshold for a full-blown regional conflict has already been shattered. Iran has already unleashed its rabid network of regional proxies, launching brazen, retaliatory strikes directly onto U.S. military bases across the Persian Gulf. Simultaneously, Israel has violently expanded its own relentless military campaign deep into the heart of Lebanon. The entire region is practically soaked in gasoline, just waiting for a single errant spark. Imagine the apocalyptic fallout if a stray Iranian ballistic missile manages to slip through the defense grid and seriously cripples a multi-billion-dollar United States aircraft carrier. Picture the unprecedented global outrage if these ongoing high-intensity strikes accidentally result in a massive, devastating civilian death toll within a neighboring peaceful Gulf state. If either of those horrific events actually occurs, the immense pressure to escalate will completely and uncontrollably explode. Officially, no sane world leader actively wants a third world war to start in the desert sands, but the dark pages of history are written in the blood of massive empires that stumbled blindly into apocalyptic conflicts entirely by accident. So, if we step back from the brink of the abyss, how does this nightmare actually end based on the current, highly volatile dynamics? The most historically plausible outcome is not the spectacular total collapse of the ruling regime, nor is it a world-ending, full-scale regional war. Instead, we are looking at a violently pressured restructuring, a brutally managed transition of power forced by the barrel of a gun. If the relentless American airstrikes continue to systematically vaporize Iran's military infrastructure, a desperate window for back-channel diplomacy might finally crack open. Shadowy intermediaries operating out of neutral nations like Oman or Switzerland will begin carrying desperate, top-secret messages in the dead of night. A fragile, incredibly tense political deal gradually becomes possible. Iran, bleeding and heavily broken, finally agrees to completely dismantle its terrifying nuclear threshold capabilities under the watchful, uncompromising eyes of international inspectors. They are forced to rigidly cap their ballistic missile ranges and drastically slash the massive funding flowing to their regional proxy terror networks. In exchange for this ultimate surrender of power, the deafening bombardment finally stops, and a phased, carefully monitored relief from crippling economic sanctions begins. The regime technically survives the terrifying onslaught, but it emerges permanently crippled, humiliated, and heavily constrained. Global energy markets finally breathe a massive sigh of relief as the international panic subsides. International shipping hesitantly resumes its normal, profitable routes, and the suffocating price of oil slowly drops back toward sustainable pre-war levels. Washington proudly parades in front of the cameras, loudly claiming a total strategic and moral success. Tehran simultaneously broadcasts aggressive state propaganda, desperately claiming a miraculous survival against the great enemy. The rest of the world nervously moves on, stepping into a future that is slightly more unstable than before, but thankfully not completely engulfed in nuclear flames. This delicate, heavily managed transition is the absolute cleanest path out of the darkness. However, the success of this fragile peace deal hinges entirely on a single, uncontrollable variable that could instantly destroy everything. That fragile variable is the relentless, unforgiving march of time. If this military operation concludes swiftly within a few decisive weeks, the political momentum remains intact and a fragile deal survives. But if this brutal conflict stretches agonizingly into months, the entire house of cards completely collapses.
Suffocating domestic political pressure, catastrophic global economic strain, and highly opportunistic power grabs by Russia and China will violently complicate every single negotiation. However, you must realize a far more terrifying truth about the bigger implications of this war.
Even if Operation Epic Fury ends with a flawless textbook success, the entire global world order has permanently shifted beneath our feet. The undeniable message broadcasted to the world is clear and absolutely chilling. Regime decapitation is officially back on the table as a viable military doctrine. That single realization sends massive, unstoppable ripple effects tearing across the globe. Paranoid authoritarian governments worldwide will instantly harden their leadership protection to extreme, unprecedented levels. Nervous nuclear threshold states will rapidly accelerate their weaponization programs, driven by a sheer, primal fear of their own sudden vulnerability. We are already seeing this global panic manifest in real time. France has abruptly announced that it will stop publicly disclosing the exact number of its nuclear weapons, actively planning to aggressively increase its doomsday arsenal. Shadowy proxy warfare suddenly becomes vastly more attractive and frequent than ever risking a direct, suicidal confrontation with a superpower. And the terrifying lesson regarding global energy is now blatantly obvious to everyone watching. The Strait of Hormuz remains the single most fragile, terrifyingly vulnerable choke point in the entire global economy. We have learned the hard way that even without a formal military blockade, the raw, paralyzing fear of a single missile strike alone is enough to completely disrupt global trade. This conflict violently reinforces a much broader, inescapable reality that you can no longer afford to ignore. In our modern era, absolutely no war is truly isolated. The explosive fires in Iran directly connect to the bloody trenches in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine connects directly to the surging, painful cost of your monthly energy bills. That skyrocketing energy cost connects directly to the crushing inflation, quietly eating away at your hard-earned savings. That relentless inflation connects directly to highly volatile domestic elections. And those unpredictable elections ultimately dictate the new, fragile global alignment of power. Operation Epic Fury is not just another distant, tragic Middle Eastern event that you can simply scroll past on your newsfeed. It is a brutal, comprehensive stress test of the entire international system, and your personal future depends entirely on whether that system holds or shatters. Will you be caught completely unprepared when the next global domino falls, or will you arm yourself with the strategic knowledge required to survive the coming storm? Do not let the unpredictable chaos of global geopolitical events dictate your financial and personal survival. Subscribe to Primal Methods right now, hit that notification bell, and join a community of sharp individuals who refuse to be blindsided by history.